Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and welcome to my next Deep Purple video where today I will be concluding the story of Mark II in the 70s. So we've got a few albums to talk about. Obviously, the big one is Machine Head. Fantastic album, obviously. We've also got Made in Japan. Now, normally for these video series, I don't really focus on the live albums. I'm a huge fan of live albums, but for these video series, I've always found it simpler to go through a band's catalog by talking about the studio material. However, you can't really get away with talking about the history of Deep Purple without talking about Made in Japan. It's a very essential component to their history. And finally, we'll also chat a bit about Who Do We Think We Are? I've only got this flimsy CD. Unfortunately, I do not own a copy of this on vinyl, but it's a good release. This is the 25th anniversary edition, so there's all kinds of bonus tracks and outtake studio material and stuff like that. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, obviously Deep Purple Mark II, the lineup consists of Ian Gillan on vocals, Richie Blackmore on guitar, John Lord on organ, Roger Glover on bass, and Ian Pace on drums. And this period, so kind of mid 1971 up to mid 1973, they're under immense pressure from the record company. The touring schedule that they were under is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the amount of times that they would cross the Atlantic, to do U.S. tours and then back to Europe, and then of course they go to Japan eventually. They really never got a break, and the management was really working them to the bone. Obviously, they wanted to capitalize on the success of Deep Purple and Rock and in Fireball, but it put the band under immense pressure. There's a lot of pressure to record, follow-ups and keep the quality of the studio material very, very high. And unfortunately, I think this is the principal reason why the social situation in the band degenerates pretty quickly. Particularly between Ian Gillan and Richie Blackmore. It's never made clear exactly what the issue was between the two of them. I think they're just they're both very strong personalities, and I think it's just sometimes there's just a personality conflict. And even though I think they've always maintained a lot of respect for one another, they just weren't able to get along. And when the band is touring that aggressively, they never get a break from one another. If you go to work and there's that one person that always bugs you a little bit, and they frustrate the hell out of you, but at least you get to come home after 8 hours and you get a break from that person. But when you're in a rock band, I mean, all your meals are with these people, you're on the bus with these people, you just never get a break. And I think that's ultimately what kind of caused their relationship to fall apart. But that's just the way it goes. I mean, there's a lot of even members of the band have said that if the management just gave them like 2 or 3 months to just go away and not worry about playing any music or doing any shows or recording, they probably would have gotten a little bit more longevity out of the band. But obviously that wasn't meant to be. So where the last video left off would have been the release of Fireball in June or July of 71. And it's very interesting. I mean, I mentioned in the last video how such a small amount of the material from Fireball ever actually gets played live. The Mule gets a lot of live renditions, although that's mainly a vehicle for Ian Pace's drum solo. Strange Kind of Woman, that's kind of a Deep Purple classic that's been performed countless times by any version of the band with Ian Gillan. But it's technically not even on the European release of Fireball. That was only on the US release. But other songs from Fireball, like the title track, I mean, it got played a little bit, but I think there's some logistical issues with that, having a wheel of bass drum out for Ian Pace. It's before the days of double bass pedals. I don't think No One Came was ever played live. Bits and pieces of Fools were played live, but I think the audiences probably didn't even notice it. No 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 was in the set for a little bit, but it gets replaced pretty quickly. And yeah, I think the big reason for that is Blackmore is not a huge fan of Fireball. The whole band is kind of lukewarm on Fireball, but I think Blackmore is the most open about really not liking it so much. And the sales reflect that as well. I mean, even though I'm the first to say that Fireball's possibly one of my all-time favorite Deep Purple albums, it didn't sell quite as well as In Rock. I mean, In Rock stayed in the charts a lot longer. The initial sales for Fireball were pretty high, but it falls down pretty quickly. So as we go through the second half of 1971, I think the band was really, really focused on, putting together a strong set of material that was going to translate well on stage, and boy, did they ever succeed. So that'll bring us to the first album we'll chat about today, which is, of course, Machine Head. Like I said, this is the biggie. This is, anyone who knows anything about rock history, this is the album that Deep Purple is most well known for. I think it's probably got a little bit more staying power than In Rock. It has at least four of the biggest classics that the band ever put together. Four of the 7 tracks are legendary songs. And it is a classic album. Sometimes I know myself to be a little bit contrarian and say, oh, that's not always the best. But listening to this a few times this week, it is of a very, very, very high standard. You can tell that the band is extremely focused at this point. And I think in some ways they're kind of going back to the In Rock aesthetic. In terms of, In Rock is, characterized as being, relatively simple, but very high energy, very driving, and, very intense songs. Fireball, part of the reason why I like it so much is that it shows the band, being a little bit more experimental, it's a little more playful. They're kind of more open to playing whatever comes to mind. But in this case, they're, really pushing for that direct heavy rock sound. And it's super successful for that reason. I think it's one thing that separates it a little bit from In Rock is that this is much more polished. I think the sound on it is much more controlled, which is kind of ironic because the recording of this album was anything but controlled. Everything, the wheels were flying off the bus, so to speak, when they were trying to record this album. I'll talk about that whole story in a few minutes, of course. But even though it is returning to that raw, aggressive sound, it's less raw than In Rock. I'll put it that way. But I also think the Blackmore is probably, really driving the bus at this point. I think a big part of the reason why a lot of the material on Fireball didn't get played live is because Blackmore really didn't like a lot of it. I think the band had a pact that it would only take one member to say, I don't want to play that song, and they would choose not to. So I don't think they were realizing how much power they were giving Blackmore at that point. But, it is what it is. But got a great album cover. I love the image of it. And I only found this out recently what the cover actually is. And it's perfect for this kind of an album. It's literally just a big slab of metal, and they stamp the Deep Purple name and the album title there, and the album cover is literally just a picture of their faces reflected on this big slab of metal. And funnily enough, you can actually see the photographer, this black blob right here. You can see his 2 hands. There's one hand there and one hand there, and his head is obscured by the E of Machine Head. But I've never been able to not see that. But still, very clever concept for an album cover, and it's very iconic. This is one of those classic images. Great title for an album too. I mean, especially this early heavy rock, heavy metal kind of stuff. Machine Head. It just, I think Roger Glover mentions how it's got such a menace to it. There's something about it that is a little bit menacing, but it also reflects that the imagery is very metallic, which is obviously quite appropriate. A machine head is, of course, the tuning pegs of a guitar. Any musician would know that. I like that they actually put Roger Glover's bass there. They were the old Rickenbacker to illustrate where the title comes from, which I think is pretty cool. And so I guess we would probably talk about the story of recording this album. It is chronicled in the most famous song off this album, "Smoke on the Water." But you're watching this video right now, so I suppose I might as well retell the story. So when they get to recording this one, I think one thing, and then this kind of ties into how focused they want it to be. In Rock and Fireball were both recorded on the road, so they'd be touring for a little bit, and then book a couple of days in a studio, get as much as they could done, and then back on the road for a week or two, and then back to the studio for a little bit. I think that really benefits In Rock, because obviously the band is just forming, and they're developing the material sort of on the road, and they're testing the material on stage. But for Machine Head, they wanted to change that formula up a little bit. They wanted to designate, at least 2 or 3 weeks where they didn't have to worry about being on the road or touring or anything like that, and they just wanted to, focus and put together a really solid album. They were also trying to avoid the ridiculous taxes that were in England at the time, so it was recorded famously in Montreux using the Rolling Stones mobile recording unit. Um, and yeah, it's just for the sound of the album, which I describe as being very controlled. Like I said, the recording, the actual process of getting this done seemed like it was totally out of control. So the original idea, they go to a casino they book a casino in Montreux, Switzerland, and the idea is that they wanted to get sort of a live sound by recording it in a theater. So this casino had a concert venue in it, and they had it reserved for a few weeks so that they could just set up in the theater and record the album using the studio, the mobile studio. So they get to Montreux. There's one more show. This is December of '71, and the final show of the concert series that year is Frank Zappa and the Mothers with Flo and Eddie. Zappa had a really rough go around this time. That's stories for another video. So they were invited by Claude Nobbs, who was one of the big gurus of this Montreux entertainment scene. He was a big guy for the Montreux Jazz Festival, and he's the guy that booked the studio for them. And he says, "Oh, there's a Frank Zappa concert before you guys have the venue. Do you want to come watch it?" So of course the band says, "Yeah, let's watch Zappa and the Mothers," and they have a good old time. About halfway through the show, apparently Zappa had just started King Kong, which is one of his great melodies. Somebody has a flare gun, fires it up into this kind of hollowed out ceiling, and within minutes, it's very clear that this casino is going to burn down. So Zappa announces to the crowd, "Oh, there's a fire. Please make your way out." There's bootleg recordings of Zappa announcing to the crowd that better get out. Everything that the hotel's on fire, that the casino is on fire. And amazingly, nobody's injured. It was a very orderly, swift evacuation. Claude Nobbs, this part of the story is referenced in Smoke on the Water, was going in and out of the casino. I keep calling it a hotel. He's going in and out of the casino, rescuing all these kids that were like in the basement or lost, just to make sure that everybody got out. And like I said, nothing short of a miracle that nobody was injured. However, the casino burns to the ground. All of Zappa's gear was lost, which is kind of sad. And then a little while later, Zappa gets knocked off stage and breaks his leg. But like I said, that's a whole other topic. And yeah, so everyone's evacuated. The band goes back to their hotel, and they just kind of spend the evening watching as all of this, this billowing smoke blows over Lake Geneva. And they basically watch their recording venue turn to ash. So Roger Glover, it's either a day or two later, writes down on a napkin or something like that, "Smoke on the Water," because they were just watching the smoke blowing over the lake, and of course that would get developed a little bit later on. So after the casino burns down, Claude Nobbs, again, this guy just sounds like the greatest dude ever. Like, all this stuff is going on, and he's so concerned that Deep Purple isn't going to have this recording space. So he finds a theater that's vacant that they can use for a couple of weeks, and they set up shop. They get the studio all set up, the mobile studio set up, and they lay down a backing track for a song. It's actually, I think it was the one song that wasn't actually prepared prior to arriving in Switzerland, and they put together this backing track. And the story goes, the police are actually banging on the door due to the noise complaints, and the roadies are apparently holding the door shut so they could get this backing track completed. It's one of those stories that's probably been embellished over the years, but they did manage to get the backing track for Smoke on the Water recorded in this other theater before the police shut them down due to the noise complaints. So third time's the charm, and I think it must be Claude Nobbs again finds them the Grand Hotel, which was it's the off season, so there's no bookings or anything like that, and they finally figure out a way to get a semi decent sound going. So they set their gear up in this hallway of the hotel. There's like a little T sort of intersection in the hallway, and that's where Pacey's drums are set up. And I guess they're getting mattresses from the rooms, and they're kind of putting their own padding together and whatnot to find this ideal sound or whatever. And they end up recording the entire album that way. And famously how most of the tracks on here were recorded only in one or two takes, and I think part of that had to do with the fact that in order for them to go back to the studio and listen to what they had recorded, they had to leave this hallway. They went through like one room and then over a balcony and then into another room. And I couldn't get the exact details straight, but it was this ridiculous journey to get back to the truck, which is parked outside the front of the hotel, just to listen to a backing track. So I think a lot of the songs, they just lay it down and be like, yeah, I'm not taking this ridiculous journey to get back and listen to it. If it felt good, they were going to keep it. So I think there's probably a the performances on it seem very, very fresh because they're not doing it over and over and over again. But yeah, and that is how the album is recorded. And kind of funny. They wouldn't have. I'm sure they wouldn't have imagined that it was going to be as successful as it was when they were kind of going through all this kind of run of extreme bad luck. But it all happens. And that's the other cool thing about the album cover as well is all the you get images of the hotel on fire and all that, which is pretty cool. There's the corridor, the hotel hallway where they're all set. I think there's a picture of Ian Pace's drums in this weird little thing, but yeah, just a wild story. But anyway, we better start talking about the tracks before this turns into another hour-plus video. So the album opens with Highway Star. Without a doubt, this is probably the most influential track that Deep Purple ever recorded. It might not be the most famous. I mean, obviously Smoke on the Water takes the cake for that, but in terms of the development of hard rock and heavy metal, Highway Star is such an essential component. Just the way that the downstrokes work on it. The solos again. I really like the classical influence on both the organ solo and the guitar solo. There's threads of that what they were doing with the concerto in there, but obviously there's no orchestra. They're just kind of putting these little snippets and bits and pieces and kind of nods to classical traditions, and they're weaving it into the solo. So it's a much more subtle way of bringing the classical influence out, but that's obviously hugely influential on metal. Yngwie Malmsteen certainly wouldn't be around if it weren't for Highway Star. Lyrically, it's great. It's a driving song. It's a love. It's a love song to your car sort of thing, right? And it's just so fantastic. There's so much to like about it. Ian Gillan does a great vocal performance. They're very much carrying on the tradition of opening their albums with something that's just a balls out rocker. It's really good. I love those opening guitar chords. It just cuts right in. We get Blackmore with that doom 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 doom. It's so good. Again, kind of going back to the solos. Lord's organ solo is fantastic. I like how the organ kind of starts out. The solo, the way the solo starts out, it almost sounds like a car's engine revving up, and then it goes into this sort of what Lord calls a quasi-Bach sequence, just the way that the chord progressions are, but he puts all these, cool trills and flares in it. Really, really good stuff. And then Richie's solo is absolutely fantastic as well. Both solos were actually composed and written down. And I think a lot of Richie's solos and probably a lot of Lord's solos as well are typically improvised, but I think both of them, really wanted to focus and, compose something very memorable. And Richie's solo in particular, it's just so influential. I mean, Richie isn't really a shredder, but there's the moment in Richie's solo there, when he's doing the fast trills, like that's such an essential building block of all of the rock guitar players in the 80s. And it is absolutely fantastic. I love the story of how the song was written. I guess this is like September or something like that. September of '71. Highway Star was in the set before the album was recorded. And there was a journalist on the tour bus, and he asks the band, "So how do you go about writing a song?" And Richie's got a guitar, and he just starts going, and basically improvises pretty much the whole song. And the legend goes that they actually performed it that night. Obviously, not without the solos that were kind of thought through a little bit after, but I think that's a testament to how good songwriting can be if you just let it be spontaneous. Must be pretty cool to be that journalist who was in the bus at the time and literally watching Richie Blackmore compose Highway Star in real time. That's pretty cool. Um, but yeah, it's a great song. It's got a great history, and it's one of the all-time Deep Purple classics. Move on to track two. We get "Maybe I'm a Leo." This is a great song. I really like how it paces the album really well. Obviously having something really, really high energy like Highway Star, it's nice to have a little bit more of a laid back groove. This is a little bit more bluesy. Roger Glover composed the bass line to it, or the riff, I should say. Bum 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 bum. There's something so archetypally, what am I trying to say? It's an archetypal '70s sound. I mean, when you think of like what '70s hard rock sounds like, I think maybe I'm a Leo pretty well covers all your bases there. It's good. The riff is really cool. I like how it starts on the and of one. 1, 2, 3, 4, or sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, bum ba dum bum 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 bum, counting in double time there for some reason. Which is really, really cool. And Ian Pace gets some great moments on Maybe I'm a Leo. Lots of kind of playing around with the offbeats of parts after the solos and whatnot. There's some great solos here as well, both very much improvised solos, unlike Highway Star. But yeah, just a great tune. I think there's got to be some reference to the star sign. I guess Ian Gillan's star sign, he is a Leo. He is a Leo, apparently. But as far as what the lyrics are about, I'm not really, really too sure. But great song. I think it paces the album really well. And yeah, essential little bit of Deep Purple. The third song on the album is, of course, Pictures of Home. This is a fantastic song, and for whatever reason, this is one song from Machine Head that I don't think they ever played it live with Richie. There's the in concert CD that's got the BB sessions from 1970 and 1972. And the 72 sessions, they play all of Machine Head except for Pictures of Home. They put Strange Kind of Woman in there instead for some odd reason. And I can't imagine why, because I think Blackmore has been pretty open about how he really likes that song. Maybe it was tricky to pull off live. Like Pictures of Home is definitely one of the more complex numbers on the album. Certainly more complex than anything on In Rock, but it's no less heavy. The main riff is absolutely spectacular, very melodic. It's a very lyrical riff. Really good stuff. The lyrics are really, really cool as well. I think Ian Gillan is basically just kind of describing their situation, or at least their atmosphere. As all this stuff seems to be going wrong and everything's falling apart, and they're just in this cold foreign country. I'm sure like Montreux's got to be a beautiful place, but like I said, they're also in the midst of this really, really aggressive touring schedule, and I think it pretty well summarizes the atmosphere that the band was under. The other thing I really like about Pictures of Home is that every member sort of gets a little bit of a showcase. Obviously, the intro with Ian Pace, he's doing those like hyper fast triplets, and just flows seamlessly into the main riff, which has kind of got more of a swingy sort of a groove to it. So Pacey gets a little highlight there. There's a bass solo, which is always nice to hear Glover doing some bass solos. And the guitar and organ solos are absolutely fantastic, particularly the organ solo. I think John Lord's moment on Pictures of Home is a real highlight. It's a testament to him as an organ player as well. I mean, John Lord has such good taste, and he has the chops to do the really technical stuff just as well as take a Keith Emerson or a Rick Wakeman, but he saves a lot of that for dramatic effect. I mean, a lot of his stuff is very tasteful, but there's the trill in the solo from Pictures of Home where it does that, which is extremely difficult, but it almost passes you by because the solo is that the fast part is already put on top of a foundation that's so solid. So that's really interesting, and then Blackmore, of course, has some great moments there, and I love the false ending. This is one of the things that kind of makes it a little bit more complicated. Is right after the bass solo part, and it's that doodle 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 doo. drums come in, and then it goes back into that great chord sequence. I love the chord sequence on Pictures at Home. Doon, doo, 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 doo. Wait, let me get my bearings straight. I'll think of it here. Do 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 do. I'm not gonna be able to do it, but it's a great moment. That's what I'm trying to do. Sorry about that. I was very fixated in that moment. But yeah, highlight of the album for me, one of the highlights anyway. Pictures of Home is fantastic, and it did get played live after Blackmore was gone and Steve Morse was was at the helm, so to speak. But yeah, there's that. So the fourth song on the album, the final song on the first side, is it's a strange track, really. Never Before. Now this is clearly, when you listen to it, this is their attempt to put together a poppy sort of a single. And you can tell it's probably one of the most catchy things that any version of Deep Purple has put together. That main riff, that it's very deliberately commercial, deliberately catchy, and I think they do a really good job. It's no less heavy than anything else on the album, but you can tell that they were kind of going for a single, and this was their deliberate attempt at that. I love the intro. It's kind of got that funky, build up that happens. There's some really great little guitar licks from Richie on there. The middle eight, the bridge section, I think is really, really cool. That whole, I was hurt when I was younger by a woman who was cold section. I think that works really well. And I'm not sure why this didn't catch on as a single. It was released as a single, but it flopped immediately. And of course, Smoke on the Water, ends up being the runaway hit for the ages. But it's very strange. I mean, the band was all on board with that as well. I guess the band was apparently really excited about it, thinking like, oh yeah, we've put together something really good. It's short, it's punchy, there's solos, it's catchy, it's got all the ingredients for a hit. And they released it. It did absolutely nothing, but. It is still really good. I like the live version that you can get on the BBC sessions, like the in concert CD. But yeah, kind of a bit of an odd duck of a song, really. But it is very good. And anyway, we flip the record over and we get to track 1 of side 2, or track 5 overall, which is a little song called "Smoke on the Water." What can be said about this one? It's obviously such an iconic moment in rock history. There's something about the simplicity of the riff that makes it as timeless as it is. It's kind of like Beethoven. Dun 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 dun. There's almost nothing to it, but that's exactly why it's an earworm. Just that riff. Bum 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 da da. There's only 4 notes to it, really. But there's something about it. I mentioned in the first Deep Purple video that I did. It was one of my earliest musical memories. Was my dad playing me "Smoke on the Water," and there's an instantaneous resonance. That's how it was for me anyway. But it is really, really good. I mean, the intro is fantastic. The way that it builds up and you see the pieces all come together. Like, obviously, it's just Richie at the start. Then Ian Pace and the organ come in at the same time, and when the organ kicks in, you can really appreciate the tonal quality of what John Lord adds to the band. Deep Purple they're so set apart, and that they're at least in the 70s, they're not exclusively a guitar band, right? It is that blend of the guitar and the organ that makes it so special. And when they're both riffing on something, there's a sound that's unlike any other band at the time, and it really sets them apart, I think. And then of course, the bass comes in, that pulsating bass line that is so good, and then but great set of verses, and Ian Gillan is literally just telling the story of making the album and all the trials and tribulations that came along with it, and it's great, and it's funny. It is an odd song to be a single. I mean, how many massive hits are there where the band is just kind of telling a story about this crazy shit that happened to them? You know what I mean? To me it doesn't seem like hit material, and I guess the band didn't really think it was hit material either. It was just another song on the album, but it's all about the riff. The riff, in and of itself is such a great thing. There's a Roger Glover interview where he talks about one thing that kind of makes it a little bit unique is how the chorus almost cuts out a little bit. It almost doesn't conclude. You get smoke on the water, fire in the sky, smoke on the water, riff, 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 and it goes right back into it. And I think that hook is another essential part of it. Is the riff goes away, but it doesn't take too long before it comes back, and I think that's what gives it its charm. Got a fantastic guitar solo. I like how Pace kind of just dwells on the snare drum a little bit during the guitar solo. Not sure if that was an improvised one or not, but it is certainly iconic, and I think Blackmore obviously recognizes that. I mean, he does variations of the solo live, but for the most part, he does kind of stick to the basis of it. John Lord doesn't really get a huge showcase on the song. I mean, he as the song fades out, he gets a little bit of a moment. But John Lord's biggest moment's probably like during the verses, and again when the organ first comes in on that main riff. But yeah, I mean, what can be said? It's a very iconic song. It's not my favorite Deep Purple song. I think most fans of Deep Purple wouldn't consider "Smoke on the Water" to be their favorite song, but it is very good. You can't deny its quality. And it's interesting too because it doesn't. I don't think it reflects Deep Purple's sound. On the whole, I mean, it probably has I'm thinking of other songs that they released already that you could compare it to, and the only thing that I can think of is maybe "Into the Fire." But it is more of a laid back track, really. I mean, Machine Head is pretty much all full tilt, in your face, heavy, with two exceptions, and that's maybe I'm a Leo and Smoke on the Water, which are both kind of a little bit more laid back and groovy. But whatever it is about the song, it worked because it was hugely successful. And to this day, it's everybody knows "Smoke on the Water." It's just one of those riffs. Anyway, we move on to the 6th track on the album, the second on side 2, and we get "Lazy." This is the other song that was in the set lists prior to the recording of the album. This one was introduced again, kind of September of '71, I think, and this is the song that replaced "No No No." Much more high energy track than "No No No." Whereas "No No No" was kind of again laid back and groovy and kind of funky. "Lazy" is much more intense, and it's an interesting blend of influences, actually. I mean, there is a certain bluesiness to it, but the fast pace and the high energy kind of, again, it reminds me of that classic '50s rock and roll. But then there's also a great swing to it. There's some jazz to it as well. It's very hard to place specifically where the influences come on "Lazy," but it is fantastic. That main riff is again, it's another iconic thing. And it's a great vehicle for improvisation. The live versions of "Lazy" would be, these massive things where the band's kind of fooling around with one another, and they're trading solos, and sometimes Blackmore would never actually play the riff, and he would just noodle around for like 10 minutes before they'd actually get into the song. So it's a perfect song for the state of the band at this time on stage, because it did allow for that. It is very loose, and it allows for the improvisation. The studio version here has got a fantastic organ solo, unaccompanied, where Lord just kind of has a showcase to kind of do his thing. And most of the live performances would usually start that way as well, where it's just John Lord, demonstrating his prowess on the instrument. Very few lyrics on "Lazy." The lyrics are quite small, kind of lazy lyrics by Ian Gillan there. The lyrics probably aren't the most brilliant in the world, but it fits the concept of the song, right? Gillan has some great moments on the harmonica as well, and it's a shame he doesn't play more harp, actually, because it sounds fantastic. And yeah, it's another classic Deep Purple song that any time that Gillan's in the band, then there's always going to be performances of "Lazy." I think they did it with Joe Lynn Turner in the 90-91 era, but don't quote me on that. I'll have to double check the set lists. I could see them trying to do that with Joe Lynn Turner, but this is a Mark II classic, one way or another. And then we end up at the final song of the album, the epic conclusion, which is, of course, "Space Truckin'." This is, for a long time, if I had to single out a favorite Deep Purple song, I mean, the album would probably be my favorite Deep Purple album would be Fireball, but if I had to single out a specific song, it might be Space Truckin'. I absolutely love this song as a kid, and this is where kind of really drives the point home of like them finding success with these brutally simple, well, I should say simple and yet brutal. Um, Songs and Space Truckin' is a perfect example of that. Like the opening riff is just so insistent and in your face, and like I said, brutal. Just dun 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 dun. I like how the guitar is actually not present at the intro of the song. It's just John Lord and Roger Glover. We get the bass and the organ, and Pace comes in with the cymbal chokes and that, and then the guitar finally comes in with Ian Gillan, and this is one of those 50s rock songs, really. Or at least the verses are. Once we get into the chorus, though, that's when we have that insane riff. It's so simple, just this little chromatic thing that Richie's doing, but it's so effective in its simplicity. I think I'm not sure if this is an actual Richie quote, but he watched the Batman TV show. And that was allegedly the inspiration for that particular riff. But it's just so good. It's so heavy. The live versions, of course, were absolutely out of this world. Studio version still got a great solo and all that. The big highlight of the song is that big build up, the wind up that leads us to the final chorus. That's just absolutely immense. Right after Ian Pace does a little drum solo, a studio drum solo, which is pretty cool. Ian Gillan is absolutely on fire. His vocals on this song are fantastic. We get some of those great high screams again. I love the yeah yeah yeahs in the verse as well as the very end where yeah 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 space trucking. Really really good. The lyrics are deliberately stupid as hell, but that adds to its charm, and I think that's that's why I'm such an Ian Gillan fan, is that he doesn't take himself too seriously, and I mean sometimes if you get a band that takes himself seriously and you get stupid lyrics, it doesn't come across well. But when you have a band that puts that has a song like Space Truckin' with these stupid lyrics about driving a truck through space, I guess all these cheesy space age lyrics or whatever, you know a band like Deep Purple puts a stupid song like that together, and Ian Gillan be the first person like, yeah, we just threw these stupid lyrics together and da da da, and that's you can get away with it in that case, right? But yeah, it's such a good song, perfect way to close the album, and again, this is that in rock thing. There's really no quiet moments on this album, and I think that adds to its strength, which brings up the oddball that was recorded during these sessions. They recorded a song called "When a Blind Man Cries," and it's a beautiful song. It's a very very understated, very quiet ballad. Very much led by John Lord, but this is very sort of pensive. Laid back isn't the right word. It's a quiet organ sound, and it just kind of goes through this chord sequence. Richie puts down some really really touching light solos. And Ian Gillan, kind of sings this sort of melancholic, song about a blind man. I think there's probably some metaphors there. Just reflecting on their situation at the time. Being under so much pressure and being stuck in Montreux where all this crazy shit's happening and they're not able to get anything done. And it is a beautiful song. And it's funny because I think that there's a big faction of Deep Purple fans that believe that "When a Blind Man Cries" should have been on Machine Head. Some of the band members themselves have said, "Oh no, it should have been on Machine Head," but Richie said no, and that probably was the case. But I think Richie was probably right. I can't. When I look at the track listing of Machine Head, I cannot see where "When a Blind Man Cries" would fit. I know the CD reissues usually include it as the final song on the album, but it doesn't work after Space Truck. And Space Truck it's just such an immense and intense thing. It just seems odd to finish the album out with a ballad like "When a Blind Man Cries." But I think amongst fans that song is quite famous, and After Blackmore quit the band, finally, for the last time in the '90s, it has popped up in the sets fairly regularly. So, in some senses, When a Blind Man Cries is one of those kind of hidden, gems in Deep Purple history. But I'm personally glad that it wasn't on Machine Head because it wouldn't have fit, and it's interesting to speculate how much its inclusion would have affected the impact that Machine Head had, because it is so very different from the rest of the material. But yeah, in any case, there it is, their most successful album, their most famous album. This is their calling card for life. And as much as I'd like to be a contrarian and be super critical of it, it's kind of difficult too, because it's difficult to be critical because it is just so objectively good. It is of an objectively high standard, in my opinion. And that's Machine Head, which will bring us to the next album I will rant about, which is Made in Japan. So I'm not gonna go too long into the details on this one. I mean, for the most part, a lot of Machine Head is included on this. It's almost like a live version of Machine Head, with a couple of extra tracks thrown in there. But this is like the kind of like the if Machine Head is the moment that like really cements them as one of the top rock acts of the day, this is the one that really like puts them in history, so to speak. It's a really, really good album. It almost never came out, actually. So they go to Japan for the first time in August of '72. So Machine Head gets released in March of '72, and again they're still on this insane roller coaster of constant touring. The first tour of Japan happens in August, and when they get there, the Japanese promoters proposed this idea. They said, "Oh, we'd really like to record your live concert for posterity." And I think the band was very much against it. I don't think they didn't really like the idea of doing a live album. They didn't want to appear cheap or anything like that, or trying to milk whatever else they could out of the success of Machine Head. I think they were wary of doing it in any case. But they were persuaded to record the shows under certain stipulations. So I think the band agreed that, okay, yeah, you can record the shows, but you're only going to release it in Japan. And they wanted their engineer, Martin Birch, to be in charge of the mixing and mastering and all that fun stuff. So they go through with the concerts. I'm pretty sure it was just 3 shows that were booked in Japan. I'm not sure if they played any more, but it's the 16th, or sorry, the 15th. Yeah, it is the 15th. Is the first show in Osaka. 16th is also in Osaka, and then they go to Tokyo for the 17th of August. So 15th of August, 16th of August, 17th of August. So 3 days right in a row. I'm pretty sure they play largely the same set. The band talks about how they were very nervous on the first night, but they started to loosen up after a while, because they were obviously conscious of the fact that they were being recorded. But at least what comes through on the album, ultimately it does not really diminish the impact of the concerts, because they are absolutely on fire, and it really does. What I love about this album is that it really captures the band at the peak of its powers. And one thing I really appreciate about this album is that it is, warts and all. There's a few moments where they don't hit things quite exactly on the same time. There's moments where there's little hiccups or near train wrecks. There's off notes now and again, but that's what you want a live album for. If there's anything that really drives me crazy, is when a live album is released and it's just loaded with overdubs, and they try and perfect it, and they try and do this, that, and the other thing to make it sound perfect. But a live situation is never a perfect situation, and if you can capture a moment and you get those little flaws, then I think that's all the better. The other thing I really like about this album too is that the tempos shift a little bit. When the band gets excited and Pacey's really feeling it, the tempo does urge up a little bit, but then it slows back down a little bit. It has room to breathe. And this is before the days when all music was put on a grid and everything had to be metronomic and perfect and this, that, and the other thing. And that's not natural. I mean, people speed up when they talk, or people slow down when they talk for dramatic effect. There's no reason why music shouldn't do the same thing, right? As long as it's not super ridiculous. But little fluctuations in time are absolutely okay, and I think it certainly it translates well into the songs, right? But Yeah, the one thing, so the track listing is a little bit different from the main set on the album. Sorry, the track listing on the album is a little bit different from the sets that were actually performed. So, on the album, you get Highway Star, Child in Time, Smoke on the Water, The Mule, Strange Kind of Woman, Lazy, and then finishing with Space Truckin'. So that's the main set. The only difference is that Smoke on the Water was typically the second song played. So the running order of the actual shows would have been Highway Star, Smoke on the Water, Child in Time, Mule, Strange Kind of Woman, Lazy, Space Truckin'. We also don't get the encores on here. There's a special edition that includes the encores of course, but and I'm not really too sure if they played all three songs or if they were taken from different nights. But the encores that were played during the Japanese tour was Lucille, it's a BB King cover. They played that a lot around that time. Speed King was also performed the odd time, and so too was Black Knight. But yeah, a few notes on the songs on the recording. So obviously, Highway Star demonstrates just how great a concert opener this is. As much as I like those opening chords on the album version, I like how they do it live, where you just get Pacey just hitting those 16th notes on the snare. I also like the beginning where you kind of hear the band tuning up. That's definitely a '70s thing. The band kind of noodling around a little bit. And then yeah, the song kicks in and it absolutely kicks ass. There's a bit of liberties taken with the solos, but they are for the most part structurally sound and intact. Great version of the song. Track 2 on the album is Child in Time. Got to have a live version of Child in Time, of course. This is a great version. Again, the guitar solo on here is absolutely fantastic. Richie is in his prime here. He's doing so good. I like that in Child in Time there actually is a little bit of a hiccup. I think Pacey kind of loses his way at one point, but what I like about that is you can see the band react to it and how quickly they get back on point. But there's one point during the fast bit of Child in Time and where they do skip a beat quite briefly, but they put it back together without too much difficulty. It should be noted that Dream Theater does. They did a version of Made in Japan. They covered the whole album, but they covered it warts and all. So even Portnoy he skips the beat at the same part that Pacey skips a beat, and I'm sure whether they speed up or slow down, I'm not really too sure, but they play it exactly, including the blue note, so to speak. So that's kind of cool and kind of funny. Next song, "Smoke on the Water," second song performed at the concert. Obviously, this is a really interesting version. I like how Richie kind of plays variations of the riff. He gets the crowd all excited. They start clapping along, and then he just da ba ba da ba ba ba. He just that's just so Richie. But the first time I heard that, I was like, oh my god, that's embarrassing. He messed up the riff, but that Richie doesn't mess up the riff. He just farts around, right? He does that a lot in Lazy as well. Track 4, very, very good version of the Mule. It's great to have a live version of that. Great drum solo by Ian Pace. Again, not a huge fan of drum solos that go on for a long time, but this is the '70s, right? Every band had a drummer that did a drum solo. It's when they go long on, like when John Bonham would just play for like 20 minutes. It's like, whatever. But Pacey doesn't quite overstay his welcome. He certainly demonstrates his technical prowess quite well. The next song, "Strange Kind of Woman," this is a concert staple, much better than the studio version. The great thing about "Strange Kind of Woman" is when they did this live, they would kind of bring the intensity down, and Pacey would just kind of reduce his groove to just a really light shuffle, and Gillan and Blackmore would trade licks off each other. So Gillan would do a little vocal thing, and then Blackmore would repeat it, and they'd kind of do it together, and they'd kind of play around with each other in that regard. It's kind of fun little vocal and guitar improvs. And around this time, I mean, I would imagine their relationship was pretty sour on a personal level, but the fact that they would always, have that little bit of fun on Strange Kind of Woman certainly demonstrates the fact that even though they weren't able to get along and they did have this kind of, essential personality conflict that was, around this time pretty close to being, impossible to reconcile, they still had a lot of respect for each other, musically. And I think even to this day, I mean, I don't think either of them would say anything bad about the other in terms of their, musical ability. It's just something else that's there that they don't get along. But yeah, great version of Strange Kind of Woman. The live versions are always better. We get Lazy, great version of Lazy. This is where you can really see them taking liberties with the loose structure, and there's all kinds of fun, improvisation. Again, Richie does the same thing on Lazy, where he plays the riff and then he noodles for another few seconds and then plays it again. But yeah, great example of the band, absolutely on fire. Great version of that. And then side four, the final track on the album, they finish with Space Truckin'. Although you could technically call it Space Truckin' / Mandrake Root, because they attach the second half of Mandrake Root to it, and then that kind of becomes the sort of grand finale of the concert proper. But the Space Truckin' section is absolutely fantastic. We Ian Pace kind of sets things up with the hi-hat. John Lord noodles around a little bit, but when the riff comes in and they get the crowd clapping along. Especially when the cymbal chokes come in, it's great how the crowd keeps the metronome, going over the riff. That's a really cool and clever way to get the audience involved, like audience participation or whatever. And it's a blistering version of Space Truck, and Gillan's in fine form. The band is just absolutely on fire, and it's fantastic. And then when we get to the Mandrake Root section, John Lord takes an incredible organ solo, very long, and they really just let it go. Right off into the stratosphere, and it's really, really good. When Richie comes in to take his guitar solo, this is one of those interesting moments where we actually do get a nod to a Fireball moment. When Richie does the little volume swells to try and get the cello sound, that has to be from the middle section of Fools. Again, how much the audience would have picked up on that in 1972, who knows, but that's got to be from Fools, that little segment. And then when the Mandrake Root comes back in and Richie takes the solo, it just goes into outer space, as we say. Yeah, it's great seeing how much the band had developed as well. Like when you listen to the original version of Mandrake Root, it's so polite. And here it's just, it warp speed. Very, very intense, and just, I mean, to have been at one of those concerts, after these blistering solos, and that's just such a classic Deep Purple moment. Again, the way that they even build up to that part. It's so fantastic. And I'm not sure if they did that outside the 70s. I mean, I'll have to kind of, as I go into the 80s and the rest of Deep Purple history, I'm not sure how much they incorporated that part, but it's that section is such a staple of the band at this era. But yeah, there it is, Made in Japan. I tried to keep that one a little bit short, but gotta have some chatter about Made in Japan. This is an essential moment of Purple history, and it's very, very good. One thing that I noted that bugs the hell out of me is that it's mixed the wrong way. For some reason, the Richie's guitar is studio left, and the organ is on the right, and that's not how they set up live. And especially when I like to have the album cover like visible when I'm listening listening to these, and even on the cover you see John Lord on the left and Richie on the right, but when you listen to it, Richie's on the left and John's on the right, and it's a minor detail, but bugs me just a little bit. But that's the one criticism I have on Made in Japan, was the panning was wrong. Anyway, that brings us to the last album we'll ramble about today, which is Who Do We Think We Are? So this is quite often, and probably correctly regarded as the weakest moment in Mark II. You can tell the band is quite tired at this point. It's kind of funny. Like Deep Purple have never really had a leader per se. There's usually a dominant member, but they're not necessarily like a de facto leader that's dictating to the band what to do. Way back in the Mark I days, all the way up to the Concerto, you could argue that, John Lord is kind of the guy. When Richie, really pushes his heavy direction for In Rock, Richie at that point does become a little bit more dominant. But Fireball's kind of interesting in that, you see the other members' influences bubbling up to the surface, particularly Ian Gillan. And, maybe that rubbed Blackmore the wrong way, or maybe Blackmore just wasn't he just didn't understand or appreciate Gillan's sensibilities. But in any case, you see Blackmore really take the reins again on Machine Head, and I think he's probably again the driving force behind a lot of the material on that. I mean, he's the one that vetoes When a Blind Man Cries, because he's the guy that says no, it must be heavy, and we have no room for ballads, no room for quiet stuff. It's heavy from start to finish. But by the time we get to Who Do We Think We Are, I feel the band is kind of rudderless. At this point, for the most part, Gillan and Blackmore aren't even talking to each other. They're staying in separate rooms. They're just staying as far apart from one another as they possibly can, probably just for the sake of keeping the peace. But this means you don't really have any dominant members, and they're just sort of in the studio making an album. So they don't really have, a definite direction around here, unfortunately. But because the band as a unit is still at the peak of their powers, they do churn out some really great material on here. Like, this is by no means a bad album, but it's an exhausted album. And I think at this point that, probably every member had come down with some sort of illness or something, just due to the sheer exhaustion of never getting a break on the road. And at this point, like, this is recorded July of 72 and July and October of 72. So kind of around the Made in Japan time. And again, at this point, they'd been on the road basically since the July of 1969. So they've basically had 3 years of absolutely no break. Constantly recording, constantly touring. They never get a break from one another, and they're just spent. They're a spent unit at this point. But because they're still peaking as a band, like I said, it's still got some good material on here. So. Yeah, we'll dive into the tracks to make it kind of efficient. We'll talk about the album cover first. I think the album cover, inadvertently really captures, the state of the band at this point. It's this weird kind of, I guess it's like a satellite image of Earth somewhere, and you can see some rivers and stuff in the background. You probably can't see it on my camera because it's crappy and there's glare, and I don't know why I keep putting this in your face, but I keep doing it. But then the band is all, in these like little bubbles that are kind of floating up above the landscape, but they're all separate. They're not together, and I think that certainly reflects where they were at as a band. The title's kind of funny. It comes from I think Ian Pace recommended it because he'd always look at reviews in the papers, and they would always start with "Who do Deep Purple think they are?" What da 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 da. So I said, just make the album "Who Do We Think We Are?" So it's a weird title, but I guess it works. We'll talk about the tracks. So opens with "Woman from Tokyo." Now this is interesting. I always thought, because the sequence of releases, this comes out after Made in Japan, but they actually wrote and recorded this before they went to Japan. This was written in July of 72, and Made in Japan comes out in August. So I think Gillan, the lyrics on here is really just kind of singing about the excitement of going to Japan for the first time, and he kind of dresses it up in metaphor about a beautiful woman from Tokyo and whatnot, which is kind of cool. It does break the tradition of opening the album with something that's really, really intense. Obviously the song does build up and it goes into a pretty high energy rocker, but it's a very slow start. We get Ian Pace just kind of laying down the 16th hi-hat groove, and then Richie does some riffing, and the bass comes in, and it slowly kind of builds up, kind of similar to Smoke on the Water, really. But it doesn't slap you in the face to open the album. It draws you in a little bit more, but still a great track. It's weird. This was very rarely performed in the 70s, but when Mark II reforms in '84, it kind of becomes a standard in the set list forever after, really. And it's weird that they didn't play it live that much, because I think this was the only hit off the album at the time. But again, they maybe they just couldn't be bothered to get it together, because the social situation in the band was such a low point here. But in any case, it's a great song. I love it's got a really great middle section there. Paces does some really, really good hi-hat work, and classic bit of Deep Purple. And then we get track 2, Mary Long. Pretty good song, a pretty great rocker. I like the weird, like, it almost sounds like a synthesizer that John Lord's using to open the track. I know there's synthesizer on Burn, but I'm not sure if he had it at this point or not. But really good song and quite funny lyrics actually. Ian Gillan is kind of having a go at some of the political figures in England at the time. Um, oh, is it Mary White something? I don't know, but there's two particular politicians that he was having a go at, and this is one of Gillan's great, sarcastic and funny lyrics. These were these politicians were really kind of railing against smut and whatnot, and how sex is bad and sex is evil and this that the other thing. And I guess this lady announced her pregnancy around this time, this politician or whoever it was. And the chorus for Mary Long is, "How did you lose your virginity, Mary Long? Because it's it seems like you have such a problem with sex. How could you? We didn't know you had it in you." That's one of the lyrics in the verse. That's just hilarious. That's a good bit of Gillan humor. Um, but yeah, the main part of the song, like I said, it's a pretty straightforward rocker. The real highlight is the kind of coda where it goes into this kind of swingy rhythm, and Blackmore's doing these really cool bends and whatnot, and Gillan's got some great vocal bits on here. I think you can tell Gillan's voice is starting to wear down a little bit on Who Do We Think We Are. He's he never sang like he did on In Rock ever again after that recording, but for Who Do We Think We Are, it's his voice is still really good. Like, I don't think he's really done any damage at this point, but you can just tell he's tired. I should say as well regarding the way the album was recorded was there was a similar idea to Machine Head, where they wanted to use this Rolling Stones mobile unit to record elsewhere. So Women from Tokyo, the July sessions were actually in Italy, and they only recorded 2 tracks there. It was just Women from Tokyo and one of the outtakes, Painted Horse. But it was Italy, and it was beautiful, and they had a pool, so I think they just kind of vegged out for about 2 weeks. And then the recording for the rest of the album takes place in Frankfurt, Germany in October of 72. Should have said that at the beginning, but too late now, whatever. Moving on, back to the tracks. Moving on to the tracks again. We'll talk about track 3, which is Super Trooper. This was a song I really, really enjoyed, especially when I was younger, because I heard of. I think Who Do We Think We Are was one of the last classic era Purple albums that I listened to. So it was just exciting hearing all these tracks, Deep Purple tracks that were new to me, and Super Trooper really stuck out for me. Really, really cool riffing. Boom. Really short song. It's under 3 minutes. But Gillan's got some great lyrics. I mean, I think this is it almost seems like kind of a tribute to some of the some of their contemporaries, other artists that had passed away so young, like your Jimi Hendrix, your Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, whatever. But it's a cool song, very simple. There's some great little cool solos in there, great little bass riff for the solos. I really like how Gillan arranges the vocals on the verses, how like the first 2 lines of each verse, he makes a statement and sings "oh," but the second 2 lines, the actual lyrics go over, and then you get the backing vocal to do the "oh," which is really cool. I think that's something that always struck me as interesting. Get some kind of phase or a chorus that's applied to the entire band for the whole chorus, which I think, talking about these artists that have passed on, I think that's pretty effective. Kind of a ghostly thing to do, which I think is kind of cool. And then the final track of the first side is Smooth Dancer. Very, very high energy rocker. This is pretty musically pretty typical of something that could be on Machine Head, I would think. Pretty fast paced, pretty intense. The funniest thing about this is the lyrics, though, because Gillan is directly having a go at Blackmore. And it's not subtle at all. Like the amount of references to the word black, as a way to complain about Richie, and to me, it's funny that he's doing that, because like I said, at this point, neither Richie and Ian are not speaking to each other at all. Like they're doing their parts separately. So Richie would record his parts on his own, and Gillan would record his parts on his own. So I can only imagine how funny that must have been for Blackmore to come in one day and hear the lyrics that Gillan sang on Smooth Dancer. I mean, he had to have known that that's what Gillan was singing about. And I think he's kind of just kind of dwelling on the fact that Richie can be difficult, and he wants things to work. I mean, Gillan wants it to be all good and fantastic, but like I said, there was a clash there, and they just couldn't work it out. But it's a good song. Like I said, pretty high energy. I get a bit of comedy value out of the lyrics myself. But yeah, that concludes side one. So we flip the album over, even though this is a CD. Ha ha ha. And we get the first song on side two, which is my favorite song on the album. I think this is the highlight of the album, is Rat Bat Blue. This is a fantastic, fantastic bit of Richie guitar riffing. I just love that. Boom, bam, 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 bam. The band kicks in. Ian Pace is on fire. He's doing all kinds of cool syncopated grooves. When the verse, the verses kick in, and Pacey's just kind of marching away on the snare, and we get that kind of call and response. Like Gillan sings a word, Gillan sings a verse, and then really cool stuff. Great chorus. Rat Bat Blue. I think, it sounds like scatting, but I think I read somewhere that he's talking about somewhere where it talks about him taking like a drum rudiment like phrase. Like drummers have all kinds of phrases like paradiddles, or I think Radamakue might be where Rat Bat Blue comes from. But it's really really good. The middle section is absolutely incredible. Funnily enough, there's no guitar solo on this song at all. Like Richie's he kind of makes his presence known well enough just putting that riff down. But when we get into the solo section, the tempo really quickens up. We have a whole different rhythm. Great bass line there. And John Lord puts down possibly his greatest solo in this early Mark II period. I mentioned before how much I like his solo in Pictures of Home, but I think his solo in Rat Bat Blue, that might be one of John Lord's crowning moments. And again, it's another example of because his playing is so tasteful. When he does the really crazy stuff, there's like a harpsichord setting that he's using. And it's just incredible, like the technical ability and speed that he's applying on that solo is absolutely something else. And then it's a great wind up too when it goes back into the riff. And yeah, the Rat Bat Blue it's one of the great early Mark II songs in my opinion, and far and away the best song on Who Do We Think We Are. However, the last two songs on the album do not maintain that same quality, unfortunately. I think, the strongest material is very much on the first side and the beginning of the second side, but it does kind of nosedive a little bit, in my opinion. We get the sixth track on the album, second song on side two, which is Place in Line. This is probably the bluesiest thing that they ever did with Gillan and the band. The very beginning is just straight bam 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 bum 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 bum, and it's just especially when you have a song like Lazy on the previous album, which is just so intense and so high energy, you're never gonna match that. So maybe that's why they never tried to match that. But Place in Line is to me is several steps below that. Ian Gillan is singing in this really strange, awkward, low register. There was an interview with Blackmore that I saw, and he talks about how around this time he was really he was getting into blues, and he wanted to have a bluesy singer. And I guess he made comments like, "Oh, I want blues," and and Gillan being Gillan's, "Oh, well, I can, tell me how to sing. Like, I mean, I want to work, with you, kind of thing." And Blackmore says, "Oh, it's not really suited to you." So I've always wondered if the weird vocal style that Gillan does in Place in Line was him trying to sound bluesy. I mean, kudos for taking a risk and experimenting, but I really don't think it works. The song does pick up though, it kind of goes into, a little faster paced shuffle for the middle section. There's some cool soloing that goes back and forth, but it just doesn't measure up to the material that they had going on in the three albums beforehand. So yeah, probably the low point for Mark II in my opinion. It's really ragging on this song here, but it takes the wind out of your sails, especially coming out of Rat Bat Blue. But it is what it is. It was recorded, and it's still good that it exists. And then we finally wrap the album up with Our Lady. Now this is another one. I mean, I don't think this is as strong as anything on that first chunk of the album, but it's better than Place in Line, and it's a unique and strange moment in Purple history, really. and that there's no riff. There's no riff. There's no solos. There's no organ solos. No guitar solos. It's literally just a chord sequence, and it's very much led by the organ, which is really cool. There's some nice, little arpeggiated guitar parts that Richie does, but for the most part, this is sort of like an organ-driven power ballad. And it is good. I think that the vocal melody is really good. I think Gillan sings really well on it. There's some cool little flourishes. Like I like the organ bit, and the chord sequence itself is really really good. I think it works fantastically well. But yeah, it's still a bit of an odd duck. It's if you think about Deep Purple Mark II in the '70s, the first thing that's going to come to mind is like, okay, yeah, lots of crazy solos and lots of riffs and lots of crazy screaming and singing, and Our Lady has none of those. It's a completely different sort of a thing, and it's great that they tried it. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like the song. It is a good piece, and I think it ends the album well enough. Doesn't end on a high note like Space Truckin' or No One Came or Hard Lovin' Man, but again, I'm happy that Our Lady exists, and it's a cool song. There's only one other song to talk about here, which one of the studio outtakes, which is a song called Painted Horse. This is the other one that was recorded in Italy in July of '72, when basically they just kind of lounged around at the pool, recorded 2 songs, and then went to Japan. But Painted Horse is a really cool song. I would take that one. I would rather have Painted Horse as track 6 rather than Place in Line, personally. Painted Horse is another kind of a bluesy song, but it's very probably the most American sounding song that they had done at this point. It's very much you can almost hear like ZZ Top or something do that. That riff is very very southern rock. The recorded version that they do have, I mean, it does seem like it was a little bit underdeveloped. There's a song that they probably could have put a little bit more time into when they reconvened and were recording in Germany in the fall, but wasn't meant to be. Doesn't come out. I mean, it's funny that the vocals on this version of Painted Horse, the only one that was recorded, it almost sounds like he was kind of doing like a ghost take, or he's just trying to feel the song out or whatever. But yeah, it's all right. Like I say, it's not one of the best songs in the world, but I think the album probably would have been a little bit stronger if they put Painted Horse instead of Rat Bat Blue, and maybe developed it a little bit more, and give Gillan a little bit more time to kind of feel his way through or whatever. But again, not meant to be. So yeah, who do we think we are? They finished recording it in October. By December of 1972, Ian Gillan hands a letter of resignation to the management, basically saying, "Hey, I can't do this anymore. That this isn't the same band." He just had to get it out of the machine at this point, even though the band was doing so well both live and commercially. In the letter, I can't quote anything specifically, but he does kind of mention that he misses the earlier days of the band when they were a little bit more. I guess volatile and edgy. They always were in this period, but I think that early, the period that of like from 1969 to 1970 when they're doing in rock and they're first sort of unleashing this new sound into the world. I think he yearned for that period, and at this point they were just on a treadmill basically. It was a production line of tour, record, tour, record, tour, record. And obviously he wasn't getting along with Richie at that point, so he hands his resignation in. But ever the gentleman, he did give them 6 months, so he hands his resignation in December of '72, and he sticks with the band until end of June, I believe. End of June in '73 is when Gillan plays his last show in Japan. The final Mark II shows were in Japan, funnily enough. And then Gillan is out of the band. But during this 6-month period between when Gillan formally resigns and plays his last show, there seems to be some sort of an effort to have Roger Glover removed as well. I think Blackmore is kind of the catalyst of this. Now, there's some interviews with Blackmore, but you can never quite trust what Blackmore says. He's always got his tongue in his cheek. But he does talk about feeling kind of bad because he didn't, he's like, oh, Roger's done nothing wrong. I wouldn't want him to leave. But I think he was also saying if Roger stays in the band, then I want to leave the band. One thing I didn't mention around this period, so I think it's around the Machine Head times where Blackmore was considering starting a three-piece with Ian Pace and Phil Lynott from Thin Lizzy, although Thin Lizzy wasn't a household name at this point. But there's a certain restlessness there. I think Richie was kind of looking for an out. I think that's probably what happened is Gillan resigns, and Richie probably sees this as an opportunity for himself to resign, and then is talking with management or whatever, and basically says the only way that I'll stay is if Roger Glover's not there, because then that retains kind of the core band of Purple, which was at that point was John Lordy and Pace and Richie Blackmore. But in any case, there seemed to be some sort of a conspiracy, and Roger Glover kind of got the vibe. I mean, I think he was feeling a little bit socially isolated. He describes the band as being a little bit cold during that period. And I guess he kept pressing management saying, hey, what's going on? What's going on? Are you going to get rid of me? And I guess they finally conceded and let him know that he was going to be out of the band, and at which point he quit himself. So that left the band with that core lineup from, going all the way back to Mark I, which, of course, is Blackmore, Lord, and Pace. And those three would reassemble the band in end of 1973, and we end up with Deep Purple Mark III, which I will talk about in my next video. If you've made it this far, I really appreciate it. I'm sure it's probably over an hour. It's very close. These videos are getting too long, but I like doing the albums in like one big go because I can make more traction and get to the end of the discography and have a full series where you can watch it at your leisure. And I hope the timestamps that I put in make it a little bit more functional for you, the viewer. But yeah, in any case, if you do like what you see, like, comment, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff. I don't like saying that because I'm not a conformist, but if I'm gonna do these long videos, I mean, it might be nice to get a little extra viewership. And I understand liking and subscribing and doing all that fun stuff does give these videos a better chance to get into the algorithm. So if you enjoy it, please do all that fun stuff. And yes, thank you as ever for putting up with these ramblings, and you'll see me in the future. Take care.